Mark Carney just met in Prince Rupert, British Columbia with a group called Coastal First Nations, and the mainstream media has treated it like consultation with Indigenous leadership. But it wasn't. Carney gave them a veto on an Alberta pipeline, but there's something you may not know about this group.
The Rockefeller Brothers Fund paid $1 million for the capital to create Coastal First Nations and another $100,000 for startup. And then on Christmas Eve, 2004, a nonprofit called the Coast Economic Development Society was incorporated. But as far as I can tell, it was financially inactive for the next 3 years until it got funding from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the same foundation that funds the campaign against salmon farming and has since poured at least $270 million into activism in Canada. Coastal First Nations, $30 million, Tides Canada, at least $85 million, one grant alone in 2015 for $10 million.
Coastal First Nations is not a First Nations government. It's not a treaty body. It's not elected under Indigenous or Canadian law. It is a BC registered nonprofit advocacy organization whose influence comes from funding and political access and no democratic mandate to speak of. That matters because this organization sits at the center of an environmental NGO ecosystem that has spent years obstructing Canada's oil and gas sector. The funding behind that ecosystem isn't accidental. On the foreign side, the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund were central architects of the so-called tar sands campaign, a coordinated effort explicitly designed to landlock Canadian oil block pipelines and keep Canadian energy out of global markets. And as you know, that campaign worked. It worked for them, I guess, not for Canadians. For more than a decade now, not a single major privately financed oil pipeline project in Canada has gone forward to completion. Not because the oil wasn't there, of course it is, not because global demand didn't exist, we know it does, not because Canadians didn't want the jobs, but because these projects were delayed, litigated, regulated, and politicized to death. Canadian energy was landlocked, capital fled, investment dried up, projects collapsed one by one. The campaign proved you don't need to beat Canadian energy on price, you just need to stop the infrastructure from being built. And that model didn't disappear. It's been replicated. New money has joined the old. The Bezos Earth Fund now pours enormous sums into global environmental activism, including Canadian partners whose work consistently targets oil and gas infrastructure. These foundations don't fund causes out of curiosity. They're funding the outcome. Groups like Make Way Canada, the rebranded Tides Foundation network act as intermediaries, moving American Foundation money into Canadian NGOs positioned to delay, litigate, and obstruct pipelines, ports, LNG terminals, and shipping corridors. The branding changes, but the objective stays the same. And the Liberals are not a bystander in this system. Ottawa funds it, which means you fund it. You fund the very organizations fighting against your jobs with the tax dollars you pay from your income at that very same job. Through conservation, marine protection, and stewardship programs, the federal government directs Canadian tax dollars into the very same NGO ecosystem. The effect is predictable and consistent. Projects stall, approvals drag on, and infrastructure never gets built. This is the context for Mark Carney's meeting with Coastal First Nations.
It's an important time for our country. You know, it's a decisive moment for Canada, and I'm very focused on not just building, but how we build and how we build together. So today is really about a dialogue. It's a dialogue of what's been happening in the region, the projects that have been led by the various First Nations here, the various opportunities that do exist, the imperative of conservation, how we have been doing on conservation in this immense, precious natural heritage, which is a huge responsibility for all of us, but is core to the identity of the First Nations here. So how we work together to preserve that, to enhance it. We're looking for opportunities for development. So today's not a day for big announcements. It is a day, as I say, for dialogue, for listening and working. There will be a time for coming back with progress, particularly with respect to conservation.
He did not meet with Indigenous communities pursuing LNG development. He did not meet with First Nations trying to build ports or export terminals, he met with a federally funded, foreign-backed advocacy organization whose record aligns perfectly with decades of organized opposition to Canadian energy. And this is why that memorandum of understanding between Mark Carney and the Alberta government to approve a new pipeline project was always nothing more than theater. It was never meant to deliver pipelines. You can't sign a cooperation agreement with Alberta while simultaneously funding organizations whose purpose is to block Alberta's energy projects. You can't claim partnership while subsidizing obstruction. The outcome was baked into this from the very start. The MOU provided optics for the Liberals. It bought time. It allowed Ottawa to say it tried while continuing to finance the same activist infrastructure that ensures nothing ever gets built. And Albertans, we see this clearly. We see our industry undermined not by markets, but by policy. We see foreign money shaping Canadian energy decisions. We see our own tax dollars used to block our livelihoods. And we see the Liberals in Ottawa still relying on Alberta's revenues to sustain Confederation while treating Alberta's prosperity as something to be managed but never built. And that is why separatist sentiment keeps growing. When agreements like the MOU are performative, when consultation is selective, and when foreign-funded activism is empowered by the federal government, people stop believing the system is honest, because it's not. Foreign interference in Canada's oil and gas sector is real. It has names, foundations, funding streams, a very long paper trail, and Indigenous front groups. The Rockefeller-led tar sands campaign was not a conspiracy. It was a strategy, and for its architects, it succeeded, and it is succeeding again. Mark Carney didn't disrupt that system. He's validating it, just like Trudeau before him. And Ottawa should stop pretending to be shocked, I tells ya, when trust collapses and national unity starts to crack. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. These foreign-funded activist groups are all part of the Great Green Reset to use climate policy to take away your job and control your life. To sign our petition, please go to nogreenreset.com.